One of the sections of the bridge was damaged as a result of a terrorist act committed by the special forces of Ukraine.
We ask travellers and residents of the peninsula not to go to the Crimean Bridge, but to use alternative land routes.
Our response will be to achieve all of the goals of the special military operation.
Welcome to the show. The strikes came in the dead of night. 2 explosions have destroyed a section of the Kerch bridge. Russia claims the blast killed 2 civilians and brought down a section of the roadway connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. When it was inaugurated, President Vladimir Putin led a convoy across to mark the event. The bridge is the most potent and most hated symbol of Russia's occupation of Crimea, the territory Moscow annexed illegally from Ukraine in 2014. Now, the bridge has been damaged for the 2nd time in 10 months. That cuts the main supply route for Russian troops fighting in southern Ukraine. And that is another blow against Moscow's forces that are still reeling from a mutiny last month.
Russia's road to Crimea, damaged once again. This footage released by Moscow shows Russian investigators picking through the debris after traffic on the bridge was suspended. Moscow says 2 people were killed in what the Russian president described as a terrorist act by the Ukrainian government.
The roadway on several spans of the Crimea Bridge was seriously damaged. Both road and rail traffic were temporarily stopped. I am waiting for concrete proposals to improve the security of this strategically important transport infrastructure.
Constructed in 2015 after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, it's a vital supply line for Moscow to access illegally held Ukrainian territory. The bridge was first attacked in October last year. Ukraine's government later suggested it was behind the attack, though never claimed responsibility outright. In Kyiv, many Ukrainians welcomed the latest assault on the bridge.
Well, at least there will be fewer deliveries of weapons and provisions, and that might weaken them.
Logistics, so yes, it's helping us, I guess, a little bit, not so much.
They will be angry and attack Ukraine harder. That's all they are capable of.
Moscow has said it is racing to repair and reopen the bridge. That's both strategically and symbolically important to Russia and its claims over Crimea.
Kurt Volker is the former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine and a former U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Welcome to the day, Mr. Ambassador. Let's start with the attack on the Kerch Bridge. What weighs heavier here, the psychological impact or the military advantage?
Well, I think it's a combination. I do think it's important for Ukraine to be able to knock out the bridge completely. It seems that they were able to take out the road lines, but the rail line may still be functional. So they'll need to go after that one more time. But it is important to disrupt the Russian logistical supply chain that is feeding and supplying the troops that are in Crimea and southern Ukraine. Psychologically for Russia, I think it's important. I think what will be even more important will be breaking the land line of communication, the land corridor that connects Rostov in southern Russia to Crimea. If Ukrainians can break through that, it'll effectively mean that Crimea is cut off. And that, I think, will have a strong psychological impact in Russia.
Ukrainian officials have been quoted, albeit anonymously, saying they were behind this attack. They're usually a lot more opaque about these kinds of operations. What can we read into that?
Well, first off, I think they are trying to avoid taking direct responsibility, just to create some kind of mystery, not being clear about how exactly it happened. But I think we can be very confident that it was, in fact, the Ukrainians that did this. These bridges don't just blow up on their own. And in addition, I think the Ukrainians feel a little bit of pressure to show that there are results from their counteroffensive. And the movement on the ground has been slow. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're a little bit more open about taking credit for this, to show that they are capable of taking down the Russian forces.
Yeah, let's look at this counteroffensive, because after last week's NATO summit, I'm wondering if Kyiv can really be assured that the support from its partner will not depend on what you were just hinting at, fast battlefield success.
Yeah, I think that we are in the clear for a while still. We have strong bipartisan support in the United States, Republican and Democrat, both houses of Congress, the White House. I'm sure that we will put through another supplemental agreement or supplemental budgeting package that will give us funding to help Ukraine throughout all of next year. So I think those things are likely to happen. That being said, I think the administration itself is a little concerned that if the conflict becomes really a stalemate, then what do they do? Do they continue just supplying the weapons and not seeing much progress, or is it time then to push for some kind of negotiation? Ukrainians, of course, are very much against that because they know that Russia's not going to give up any territory in negotiations. They want to keep taking more. But the Ukrainians are concerned that there's going to be some wobbliness on the western part.
Yeah, talking about wobbliness on the western part, the NATO summit last week, I want to share something with our viewers that you wrote about it, because you said that NATO not giving Ukraine a roadmap for membership reflects a failure to understand that the nature of European security has changed. You said, Ukraine is currently doing NATO's job for it, fighting to defend the frontier of a free Europe. It's more capable militarily than most allies and defending the values on which NATO is founded. Russia is attacking Ukraine because it seeks to defeat those values. Kyiv remaining stuck in the NATO waiting room is a green light for Putin to attack again. Now, tell me, Mr. Ambassador, how dangerous could this stalling technique become, not only for Ukraine, but for all of Europe?
Well, exactly. It is dangerous for all of Europe. For a long time, for 70 years, we were able to defend the borders of NATO territory and not worry about the outbreak of a large war in Europe that would impact the security of NATO countries. That's no longer true. We have a war in Europe right now, and it is impacting the security of every NATO country and many countries outside of Europe. We've seen the refugee flows, we've seen the disruption of energy supplies, massive inflation, and so on, and tremendous economic and defense cost to the NATO allies. So this is no longer cost-free. What needs to happen at the end of the war is for Ukraine to be admitted to the alliance and a firm border established with Russia yet again. That will be the thing that establishes security in Europe in the long term. That means in the near term, we have to signal that this is where this is going and to help give Ukraine what it needs to win the war as quickly as possible. Those are the things that would cause Putin to start to recognize that he will never succeed. If we don't do those things, if we have this vagueness and this wobbliness, it encourages Putin to keep the war going.
So why is the West not doing that? What is behind this reluctance? Some argue that having Ukraine in NATO is even against the national interests of countries like the US or Germany.
Yeah, I think having Ukraine in NATO is very much in the US and German interest. It will stabilize security in Europe. We will have clear borders again in the future. We will have one of the most capable countries in Europe militarily on side with the rest of the alliance. I think all those are great benefits.
But it could also drag NATO into a major conflict with Russia, and that is something the alliance is, of course, seeking to avoid.
That's correct. So that is why I think leaders at Vilnius, particularly U.S. and Germany, did not want to say anything stronger about Ukraine coming into the alliance. They made it very vague. They implied the allies don't agree on this, and they implied that there are some conditions that have to be met, but they didn't specify what those are. So that was a very weak signal coming out of the Vilnius summit. And the reason is just as you said. They didn't want to create an impression that NATO is in a conflict with Russia. It's only Ukraine defending itself against Russia. They also are concerned that Russia has nuclear weapons, and that's one of the reasons why they don't want the image of being in a conflict with Russia. The problem with all that is that Russia sees itself in a conflict with the West already. And just look at the number of things that Russia has done, whether it's assassinating people on German or British soil, whether it is shutting off the energy supplies to Europe or trying to use it as a weapon, weaponizing refugees and immigration, all kinds of things that are a threat to Europe from the West. from Russia that Putin continues to do right now. So we're not fooling the Russians, or we are not keeping ourselves out of any conflict simply by not saying that Ukraine has a pathway to membership. Russians already see it as that.
Kurt Volker, Special Representative for Ukraine, formerly so, and a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nicole.